Frank Harding's voice cut through the hushed dinner conversation, announcing my promotion to lead the coffee fetching for the next quarter. The client at our table, Mr. Davies, chuckled, and a slow burn started in my stomach. Later, Frank leaned in, his breath heavy with scotch. Some people just know their place, Clara May. Saves everyone a lot of trouble. The invitation lay on the kitchen counter, thick cardstock with metallic silver lettering that caught the afternoon light. It announced the annual Harding Marketing Corporate Party, a mandatory gathering Clara May had learned to dread. Another year, another evening of forced smiles and practiced pleasantries, where ambition simmered just beneath the surface of every polite conversation. She traced the ornate border with a finger, feeling the texture of the paper. It was an obligation, not an event, a performance she was expected to deliver with a convincing air of enthusiasm. Frank Harding would be there, naturally basking in the glow of his own achievements, in the deference of his employees. He was a man utterly convinced of his own genius, radiating an arrogance that permeated the entire office. 10 times worse than anyone else Clara May had ever encountered, he had a knack for making even casual interactions feel like an audition. The thought of navigating the ballroom, parrying his patronizing remarks, and enduring the thinly veiled envy of her colleagues made her stomach clench. She couldn't face it alone. Not this time. She needed Ben. His presence, solid and uncomplicated, was the only thing that could make the evening bearable. He was probably at his auto shop right now, elbow deep in an engine somewhere, grease smeared across his brow, utterly oblivious to the corporate charade she was about to endure. The contrast between his honest, physical work and the polished artifice of the party was stark. Clara May picked up her phone, the plastic cool against her ear. She took a breath, trying to sound casual, as if inviting him to a movie and not to her own personal brand of corporate hell. "Hey, you busy?" she asked when he answered, the background hum of an air compressor audible. "Always," Ben replied, his voice gruff but familiar. "What's up?" "The annual Harding shindig," she said, letting a sigh escape. "The invite came in, the big one. And I was just thinking, I really don't want to go by myself this year." A pause stretched on the line, punctuated by the clinking of tools. Ben had met Frank once, a quick introduction at a company picnic a few years back. The memory of Frank's dismissive handshake and patronizing comments had clearly stuck with him. "You know how I feel about that guy," Ben finally said, his tone flat. "He's a real jerk." I know, Clara May hurried to agree. "Believe me, I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. But it's mandatory, and Frank's just... Frank, I need a buffer, Someone to stand between me and the corporate sharks." She tried for a light-hearted laugh that felt brittle even to her own ears. "I'll make it worth your while," she added, lowering her voice a little, trying to inject a playful wink into her words. The unspoken promise hung in the air, a familiar negotiation between them. Ben sighed, a long, drawn-out sound that carried his reluctance across the phone lines. She could almost picture him rolling his eyes, wiping his hands on a greasy rag before picking up his phone. There was a moment of silence, then another deeper sigh. "Fine," he conceded, the word heavy with resignation. "But you owe me big time for this, Clara May. Big time." "Deal," she said, relief washing over her, though she kept her voice light. "You're the best." Hanging up, Clara May looked at the invitation again. She felt a small measure of reprieve, a tiny weight lifted. Little did they know just how big that debt would become, or how deeply its repayment would reshape their lives. The night of the party arrived with a palpable tension in the air. Clara May stood before the full-length mirror, adjusting the strap of her sleek black dress. The fabric felt cool against her skin, elegant but confining. Her nerves were a tight knot in her stomach, a familiar sensation before these corporate events. She tried a smile, but it felt thin, unconvincing. The night of the party arrived like a deadline, pushing Clara May forward whether she was ready or not. She stood in front of the bedroom mirror, smoothing the lines of her sleek black dress. It was a good dress, expensive, designed to make her look competent and elegant, but tonight it felt like a uniform. Her stomach churned, a familiar anxiety tightening in her chest. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. When Ben pulled up to the curb, he looked different. He'd cleaned up well, the dark suit a sharp contrast to his usual work clothes. His tie was knotted precisely, a little stiff, perhaps, but respectable. He ran a hand over his freshly combed hair as he stepped out of the truck, a gesture of mild discomfort. Even in the dim light of the street lamp, she could see the effort he'd made. The hotel was one of the fanciest in the city, all polished marble and gleaming brass. Valets moved with practiced efficiency, taking keys and opening doors. Ben parked his truck and came around to her side, his gaze sweeping over the grand entrance. He looked a little out of place, she thought, like a good solid oak table in a room full of glass and chrome. He caught her eye, a faint smile touching his lips. "You look beautiful," he whispered, his voice low and genuine. He reached for her hand, squeezing it once, a quiet affirmation that settled a small part of her nerves. It was a simple gesture, but it held a weight of affection she rarely found in her professional world. Inside, the ballroom was a spectacle. Chandeliers dripped with crystal, casting a warm golden light on the hundreds of mingling guests. The air was thick with expensive perfumes and the faint, sweet scent of champagne. The sound was a low hum of conversation, punctuated by polite laughter and the clinking of glasses. It was a world Clara May navigated every year, but one Ben had only glimpsed. As they moved past a group near the bar, a familiar voice called her name. "Clara May, there you are." Brenda Peterson from the marketing department was making her way toward them, a champagne flute held loosely in her hand. Brenda always seemed perfectly composed, her blonde hair impeccably styled, her smile a practiced curve. She stopped in front of them, her eyes, sharp and assessing, sweeping over Ben. "Brenda, this is Ben," Clara May introduced, trying to keep her tone even. Brenda extended a hand, her gaze still fixed on Ben. "And this must be your husband I've heard so much about," she said, a slight arch to her eyebrow. The way she said husband held a subtle inflection, a question mark hovering in the air. Ben shook her hand politely, his grip firm. "All good things, I hope," he joked, a faint smile on his lips, though Clara May could feel a slight stiffness in his posture beside hers. Clara May watched Brenda's eyes flick over Ben's well-cut suit, then briefly to his hands. She saw Brenda notice the faint lines of grease under his fingernails, the slight calluses on his palms, evidence of a life lived outside the sterile confines of an office. Ben's eyes, kind and steady, met Brenda's without wavering. Clara May knew Brenda was making a quick calculation, assessing the man who stood next to an executive, placing him in the unspoken hierarchy of their corporate world. The unspoken judgment, Clara May thought, the way his honest blue-collar work was contrasted against her own polished executive role. But Ben had something more valuable, she knew. Something Brenda and most of these people wouldn't understand. He had integrity. They continued to mingle, Ben making small talk about the weather, about the appetizers. He was a good sport, she had to admit, even though she could feel his discomfort, a subtle tension in his shoulders, a slight awkwardness in his movements. He kept his arm loosely around her waist, a grounding presence in the swirling crowd. Word count, the predictable rhythm of polite conversation and strategic networking had settled in when a subtle shift occurred near the ballroom entrance. A hush, barely perceptible, spread through the nearest clusters of guests, like water rippling from a stone dropped into a still pond. Clara May felt a familiar tightening in her stomach. Frank Harding, his grand entrance. He swept into the room, not walking so much as presiding, his gaze surveying the assembled company with an air of ownership. His custom-tailored suit, a deep charcoal, fit him flawlessly, the fabric undoubtedly costing more than Ben made in a month. A faint, almost imperceptible sheen of smugness settled on his face, a permanent fixture when he was in his element. Frank's eyes, sharp and calculating, narrowed almost imperceptibly as they cut through the crowd and landed on Ben, standing beside Clara May. A flicker of something, perhaps mild surprise, crossed his features before settling back into his usual bland confidence. He began his slow, deliberate path toward them, exchanging brief, performative greetings with a few key clients along the way. When he finally reached them, he leaned in, delivering air kisses to both of Clara May's cheeks, a practiced performance for the surrounding onlookers. The scent of his expensive cologne, sharp and metallic, filled her nostrils. "Clara May, darling," he purred, his voice smooth, devoid of genuine warmth. You look absolutely ravishing tonight. That dress is simply divine. He held her gaze for a beat too long, then his eyes slid over Ben, a quick, dismissive once-over that lingered on Ben's suit, as if assessing its cost, its cut, its very right to be there. "And he brought a guest?" Frank asked, the question itself laced with a mild, almost indifferent surprise. He didn't wait for Clara May to speak, his gaze already moving past Ben as if he were an inanimate object. Clara May felt the familiar prickle of irritation. She stepped slightly forward, interjecting smoothly, "Frank, you remember my husband, Ben." She emphasized the word husband, hoping it would carry some weight, some claim. Frank turned back, a thin smile on his lips, though his eyes remained cold. "Ah, yes," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "The mechanic." He drew out the word, letting it hang in the air, a small, barbed insult. Ben's jaw tightened, but his voice, though level, carried a sharp edge. "Auto shop owner, actually," he corrected, his gaze steady, refusing to drop. Frank waved a dismissive hand, as if swatting away a fly. "Same difference, really. Always so particular, aren't we, Clara May?" Now he pivoted, turning his full attention back to Clara May, effectively cutting Ben out of the conversation entirely. "I simply must steal you away for a dance. There's a new campaign on the horizon, and I wanted to pick your brilliant brain." He didn't wait for an answer, didn't give her a chance to decline. "You don't mind, do you, Alan, was it?" Before Ben or Clara May could formulate a protest, Frank took her arm, his grip firm, and expertly steered her onto the crowded dance floor. The music was a slow, sweeping classical piece, perfectly suited for his grand gesture. Over Frank's shoulder, as she was pulled away, Clara May managed to shoot an apologetic glance back at Ben. He stood rooted to the spot, alone amidst the swirling couples, his jaw visibly clenched, his eyes tracking her with a mixture of surprise and simmering anger. The air around him seemed to solidify, a silent, furious accusation. Frank's hand on her back was firm, guiding her through the steps of the waltz. Clara May tried to maintain a polite, professional distance, her posture stiff, but he subtly pulled her closer, the space between them shrinking uncomfortably. His other hand holding hers pressed a little too tightly. She felt the heat radiating from his body, the cloying scent of his cologne. He leaned in, his voice a low, insidious whisper meant only for her, almost lost beneath the swell of the music. "You know, Clara May," Frank began, his breath warm against her ear, "you really are wasted on that grease monkey. A woman of your caliber deserves so much more. Someone who understands your ambition, who moves in your world." Disgust churned in Clara May's stomach, a hot, bitter wave. She pulled back abruptly, creating a gap between them that he reluctantly allowed. Her voice, though kept low, was sharp with an anger that surprised even herself. "That grease monkey is my husband, Frank," she retorted, her eyes flashing. "And he's twice the man you'll ever be, with 10 times the integrity." Frank's eyes flashed with a momentary spark of raw anger, a brief crack in his polished facade, but his practiced smile remained fixed. He recovered quickly, his tone shifting to one of smooth persuasion. "Oh, come now, Clara May," he cajoled. "Surely you can't be satisfied with someone so common. Think of the opportunities. I could give you the world, a life beyond anything he could offer. Dinners at the club, trips to Europe, a position that truly reflects your worth." Oh, Clara May was about to deliver a scathing response, a sharp, cutting remark about his character, when, as if by a miracle, the music swelled to its final dramatic note. The song ended, providing her with an immediate escape. She practically fled from his grasp, making her way quickly, almost frantically, back through the scattering couples on the dance floor. Her eyes immediately found Ben, who stood exactly where she'd left him, his expression thunderous, a storm gathering in his usually kind eyes. But Frank wasn't done. He watched her go, a smirk playing on his lips. Then, with a casual air, he sauntered over to a small group of colleagues who had been observing the dance, Brenda Peterson among them. He raised his voice, ensuring his words carried clearly across the thinning dance floor, a deliberate performance for everyone within earshot. "Did you see Clara May's little tag-along tonight?" he mused, a sneer evident in his tone. He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. I mean, really, what was she thinking, a car mechanic? Can you imagine bringing him to the Harding marketing gala? He paused for effect, then let out a loud, braying laugh that grated on Clara May's ears even from a distance. I suppose someone has to change the oil in her fancy car, he continued, glancing pointedly at Clara May's retreating back. But to marry the help, that's a bit much, don't you think? The group of colleagues exchanged nervous glances. Brenda offered a weak, forced smile. A few others tittered uncomfortably, clearly unwilling to openly agree, but just as clearly too afraid to speak up against their boss. The air grew thick with their silent assent, their fear a tangible presence. Clara May felt a deep, burning humiliation rise in her cheeks, but also a fierce, protective anger. Clara May felt a wave of nausea wash over her, a hot flush spreading across her face. The humiliation, amplified by Frank's braying laughter and the nervous tittering of her colleagues, made tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She squeezed them shut for a moment, trying to compose herself, to swallow the bitter taste in her mouth. When she opened them, her gaze found Ben, her calm, easygoing husband, the man who handled every crisis with a quiet practicality, was trembling. Not from fear, but from a profound, simmering rage. His fists were clenched at his sides, white knuckles stark against the dark fabric of his suit. His shoulders, usually relaxed, were squared and rigid, and in his eyes, a look she'd never seen before. Cold, dangerous, utterly devoid of warmth. It was the look of a man pushed too far, to a place beyond reason. Without a single word, without so much as a glance at Clara May, Ben began to walk. His steps were deliberate, measured, cutting a straight path through the scattered groups of guests, directly toward Frank. A strange hush fell over the room. One person noticed, then another, then a dozen, the whispering conversation slowly dying down as people sensed the shift in the atmosphere. All eyes turned, following Ben's determined advance. Frank, still immersed in his own laughter and the nervous appreciation of his small audience, didn't see him coming until Ben was almost upon them. He was still chuckling, reveling in his own cruel wit, when Ben stopped, a mere foot away. Ben's voice when he spoke was low, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the sudden silence with chilling clarity. "Excuse me," he said, his eyes fixed on Frank's. "I couldn't help but overhear you talking about me. Care to say it to my face?" Frank's smug smile faltered for a brief instant, the surprise evident in his eyes. Then, with a flicker of his usual arrogance, he recovered, a mocking smirk replacing the surprise. "Well, well, if it isn't the grease monkey himself," Frank sneered, his voice loud enough for the small group to hear. He took a sip of his champagne, a performative gesture. "Come to defend your honor? Feeling a little sensitive tonight, are we, Alan?" He smirked again, pleased with his jab at Ben's misremembered name. Ben didn't rise to the bait. The slight tremble in his hands had settled, replaced by an unnerving stillness. Instead, he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile or a friendly one. It was cold, calculating, a thin, hard line that stretched across his face, and it sent a shiver down Clara May's spine. She felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. This was not the Ben she knew. This was a man preparing to detonate. "No, Frank," Ben stated, his voice resonating with quiet conviction, cutting through the silence. "I came to tell everyone here exactly who you are." His gaze swept over Frank's group, then out to the wider room, locking with a few startled faces. The room was utterly quiet now. Every eye was fixed on Ben, every ear straining to catch his words. The chandeliers gleamed, the expensive perfumes hung heavy, but the illusion of polite society had shattered. The tension was a palpable thing, thick and suffocating. Clara May realized, with a sickening lurch, that there was no turning back from this. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The air in the ballroom was thick with a silence so profound it seemed to absorb all other sound. Every eye was on Ben, who stood perfectly still, his cold smile fixed on Frank. Clara May felt her heart pounding against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden stillness. This was it. "You stand there mocking me for being a mechanic," Ben began, his voice steady, carrying clearly across the hushed room, "for working with my hands. You look down on honest labor, on building something real." He paused, letting his words sink in, his gaze unwavering. But let me tell you something, Frank. While I've been building my business from the ground up, with my own sweat and my own two hands, you've been running your company into the ground. Frank's face, which had been contorted in a sneer, immediately blanched, then flushed an alarming shade of deep red. His mouth opened, a spluttering sound escaping. "How dare you?" he managed, his voice hoarse with shock and fury. "You have no idea what you're talking about." Ben cut him off with a raised hand, not breaking his gaze. His composure was absolute, almost unnerving. "Oh, I think I do," he countered. "Your last 3 marketing campaigns were complete failures, Frank. Over budget and underperforming. Everyone in this room knows it, even if they're too scared to say it." He swept his gaze across the faces of the colleagues, and Clara May saw heads subtly nod, a collective silent agreement rippling through the crowd. Ben was vocalizing what many of them had whispered in hushed tones behind closed office doors. "The only reason this company is still afloat," Ben continued, his voice gaining strength, "is because of people like Clara May, who work twice as hard, pulling late nights, covering for your incompetence, trying to patch up the holes you constantly punch in the hull." He glanced at Clara May then, a flicker of something in his eyes, a mixture of fierce pride and protective anger. "You strut around here like you're God's gift to marketing," Ben pressed on, turning back to Frank. "But really you're just a trust fund kid who inherited a business, bought his way into a position, and hasn't had a single original idea in his life. You're a liability, Frank, not an asset." Clara May watched, stunned, as her usually reserved, unassuming husband surgically dismantled her boss with brutal, unflinching precision. Frank, enraged and embarrassed beyond anything she'd ever seen him display, tried to interrupt again, sputtering incoherent protests. He lunged slightly forward, his face mottled with fury. But Ben wasn't finished. He held the floor, his presence commanding the attention of every single person in the room. He took a single step closer to Frank, forcing him to take a defensive step back. "You want to talk about worth, Frank?" he challenged, his voice dropping slightly, becoming even more dangerous. "Let's talk about it. I may get my hands dirty, I may not wear these fancy suits every day, but at least I can look in the mirror at the end of the day and be proud of what I've accomplished. I've built something, I've earned everything I have." His eyes bored into Frank's. "Can you say the same, Frank? Can you honestly say that about yourself?" A pin-drop silence filled the room. No nervous tittering, no whispers, just the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of city traffic filtering through the thick windows. Colleagues exchanged stunned, knowing glances, the unspoken truths now laid bare for everyone to witness. The silence stretched, heavy and charged, after Ben's final question. Frank's face, already a furious red, seemed to deepen in color, turning almost purple with suppressed rage. His mouth worked for a moment, unable to form words, before he finally erupted, his voice cracking with indignation. "How dare you come into my party and spew these lies?" Frank roared, stepping closer to Ben, his hand clenching into a fist at his side. "You know nothing about this business or how it's run. You're a nobody, a common tradesman with no understanding of corporate strategy." Ben let out a cold, humorless laugh, a chilling sound in the opulent ballroom. He met Frank's furious gaze with an unnerving calm. "Oh, but I do, Frank. More than you think," Ben countered, his voice steady and deliberate. "You see, Clara may not talk about work much at home. She keeps her professional life separate, but I listen when she does. And what I've heard over the past year is a detailed story of your incompetence, your arrogance, and your complete disregard for the hard work of your employees." He then turned his attention to the wider room, his gaze sweeping over the silent, watchful colleagues. He drew them in, making them part of the unfolding drama. "Did you all know that the Carlson account, the one that saved your fall quarter numbers, the one everyone here celebrated as a major win for Harding marketing?" Ben paused, letting the significance of the account settle. "That was all Clara May's idea, every single bit of it." A murmur, low and uncertain, rippled through the crowd. Clara May felt her cheeks burn, a flush of embarrassment mixed with a strange, fierce pride, as all eyes in the room turned to her. It was true, she had conceived of the strategy, developed the pitch, fought tooth and nail for weeks to get it approved. Frank here, Ben continued, his voice dropping slightly but losing none of its edge, tried to tank it. He refused to back it, dismissed it, ridiculed it, all because he was too proud to admit he hadn't thought of it first. He actively sabotaged his own company's success just to protect his ego. Frank's face, which had been red, deepened to an alarming shade of purple. His eyes bulged slightly, his composure completely shattered. He looked like a man about to explode. This wasn't just a slight anymore, it was an exposure, a public unmasking of his greatest insecurities and failures, confirmed by the silent nods and uncomfortable glances of his own staff. "That's enough," Frank roared, taking a menacing step forward, his fists clenched. He raised a hand as if to strike, his face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "I won't stand here and be insulted by some grease monkey, some common—" He never finished the sentence. Frank's unfinished insult hung in the air, stifled not by Ben, but by a sudden, unexpected interruption. Everyone's gaze shifted, turning from Frank to the source of the new voice. It was Brenda Peterson, Clara May's colleague, the one who had subtly assessed Ben earlier. Brenda, usually so careful, so perfectly composed, stood slightly forward from her group, her champagne flute still in her hand. Her voice, when she spoke, shook visibly, but as she continued, it gained an unexpected quiet strength. "He's right," Brenda declared, looking directly at Frank, her eyes firm despite the tremor in her voice. "Everything he's saying is true." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Brenda took a breath, then continued, her words coming faster now, fueled by years of suppressed frustration. "I've worked here for 5 years, and I've watched Frank take credit for other people's work time and time again. He stifles any new idea that isn't his own, and then he claims it as his when it succeeds." It was like a dam breaking. Brenda's courage, fragile at first, seemed to embolden others. Suddenly, from different parts of the room, other voices rose, hesitant at first, then gaining confidence. Gary from accounting, a quiet man who usually kept to himself, stepped forward. "Remember the Holly Project?" he chimed in, his voice louder than Clara May had ever heard it. "That was Tom's idea, from accounting. Frank nearly lost us that account with his improvements to the proposal, trying to cut corners. If it wasn't for Clara May's quick thinking and her going behind his back to fix it, we'd have been sunk." The client was ready to walk. The accusations multiplied. A junior marketing associate, a young woman Clara May barely knew, spoke up next, her voice trembling with indignation. "He made me work 3 weekends straight on that client presentation," she accused, pointing at Frank. "Then he presented it as his own at the board meeting. Didn't even mention my name." Another voice, a middle manager from sales, added, "He berates us in meetings, calls us incompetent, and then takes credit for our successes. He creates a toxic environment where no one feels safe to innovate." The room erupted into a chorus of accusations and shared grievances against Frank. The polite veneer of the corporate party shattered completely. People were detailing Frank's professional failures, his abusive behavior, how he systematically stole credit, how he undermined his staff. The complaints, whispered in coffee breaks and behind closed doors for years, were now shouted in the open, a wave of collective anger washing over the ballroom. Frank, who had been sputtering with rage moments before, was now utterly speechless. His face had gone from purple to a mottled gray. He stood frozen, mouth slightly agape, eyes darting from one accuser to another, his grand entrance and carefully cultivated image completely demolished. He was utterly exposed and disgraced in front of his entire company, the very people he had sought to impress and intimidate. Clara May stood beside Ben, her hand finding his, gripping it tightly. A complex mix of shock, vindication, and a chilling fear for their future swirled inside her. Ben, the unassuming mechanic, had set off a chain reaction, and now everything had irrevocably changed. The ballroom, once a tableau of corporate elegance, had devolved into a cacophony. Frank, his face a grotesque mask of fury and humiliation, tried to shout over the growing clamor, demanding silence, calling for security. But his voice, usually so commanding, was now shrill and without authority. No one listened. Brenda, Gary, and others continued their outpouring, years of resentment now fully unleashed. Clara May watched as Mr. Davies, a senior board member and a quiet observer from the sidelines, stepped forward, his expression grim. He held up a hand, and surprisingly, the room began to quiet. The damage was done, irreparable. Clara May felt Ben's hand find hers, a steady anchor in the storm. They turned and walked out, leaving the chaos behind. The drive home was quiet, a heavy silence punctuated only by the hum of the engine. Unspoken questions hung in the air, thick with uncertainty about her career, their future. She stole a glance at Ben. His profile was set, his jaw still tight, but the cold fury in his eyes had receded, replaced by a quiet exhaustion. The next day, the summons came, an email from HR requesting her presence in the executive conference room. Clara May's stomach clenched. Dismissal. It had to be. She dressed carefully, a simple professional blouse, her mind racing with contingencies. She walked into the conference room to find not HR, but Mr. Davies and another senior board member, Mr. Evans, seated at the long polished table. Their faces were somber but not accusatory. Mr. Davies cleared his throat. Clara May, he began, what transpired last night was, to put it mildly, an embarrassment to Harding Marketing. But it also laid bare some truths we, as leadership, have either overlooked or chosen to ignore. He paused, meeting her gaze. Frank Harding has been relieved of his duties, effective immediately. He will be tendering his resignation for personal reasons. Clara May felt a profound sense of shock, then a slow, dawning vindication. However, Mr. Evans continued, leaning forward, your actions and those of your husband also brought to light your exceptional contributions to this company, particularly the Carlson account. We recognize your true value here, Clara May. He then outlined an offer, a promotion to Senior Marketing Director, heading a newly formed division with direct oversight of major accounts, including Carlson, a significant raise, and a promise of a more ethical, transparent working environment. She accepted, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. Ben was waiting for her in the truck, parked a block away. He listened quietly as she recounted the meeting, his steady gaze never leaving her face. You earned it, he said simply, when she finished. Every bit of it. You always did good work, Clara May. You just needed to be seen for it. The Carlson account was officially reattributed to her, its success a testament to her vision, not Frank's false bravado. Her reputation solidified, not just within the company, but across the industry. She thought back to Ben's words at the beginning. You owe me big time. The debt he'd mentioned wasn't for the expense of a suit or the discomfort of a corporate party. It was for the moral courage he'd shown, for standing up for their family and her honor when no one else would. He'd risked everything to ensure the truth saw the light of day. Clara May found success in her new role, surrounded by colleagues who respected her, in an environment that valued integrity over ego. Ben's auto shop continued to thrive, a steady, honest business. Their relationship, tested by Frank's betrayal and the public confrontation, had only grown stronger. It was a clear, unvarnished truth that true worth was never found in titles or bank accounts, but in character, in the quiet, unyielding strength to stand up for what was right, even when it cost you everything. Life settled back into a different kind of rhythm. Clara May's new division at Harding Marketing prospered, built on transparent practices and the collaborative spirit Frank had stifled. She found satisfaction in the work, the kind that came from genuine effort and recognized achievement, not from navigating a boss's fragile ego. Ben's auto shop continued its steady trade, the bells above the door chiming with familiar regularity as customers came and went. He didn't speak often about the party, but sometimes a quiet look passed between them, a shared understanding of what had been risked and what gained. The incident had peeled back layers, revealing the true cost of silence and the quiet power of speaking up. It proved that some debts were not measured in money, but in dignity, and that integrity, though sometimes costly, held a value far beyond any corporate title. Their lives, now firmly on this new path, moved forward with a quiet resolve, the consequences of that public night shaping their future, one honest day at a time.